Richard, how are you doing today?
Uh,
Okay, I guess. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tolkien Society here on March 14th, 2015, just a few minutes after 1 p.m. Pacific time. And Brian was unable to attend. He's usually our secretary of notes and such, so I'll be going over the notes today, although we can potentially take turns on that.
Indeed.
Chris is joining us, and congratulations, Chris. Apparently we have, well, let me before I get to that, so we are an official SMEAL of the UK Tolkien Society, and I'm a paid member, have been for, I don't know, half dozen longer years, something like that. And then Brian also is a recent UK Tolkien Society paid member, and good news, Chris, you had to share?
Well, I joined the dark side as well.
The dark side? The dark side?
Well, you know, the Brits live in a gloomy place, you know.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. Well, today's weather is very British.
Yeah.
Kind of unusual for Spokane. I'm a paid member as well for
And and Richard as well. Right now you've been what, about a year, 6 months?
Yeah, he gave it to me. Brian purchased it as a gift.
Right.
For Christmas.
I did it for Brian for his birthday or Christmas a couple of years ago, and then he.
Well, for me, my birthday and Christmas are 5 days apart.
Oh, right.
So.
My oldest son's that way too. And so we're all three plus Brian, all four now actual paid members of the UK Tolkien Society.
So someone needs to email the society because we are not on their map.
Yeah, and they keep asking for it. I keep sending them the information. I just sent last month a request to be put on that map again. I got an email back saying, sorry about that, we'll take care of it. But they are a volunteer-run group, and, you know, they have a tendency for one thing to push out another, as they say, Butterbur.
My name made the list of new members.
Oh, his name made the list of new members, which means probably next journal, you'll probably be in that as well, Chris.
Sure.
So they know who you are and can hunt you down. All right. Well,
that sounds
for those of you who may be new to our monthly meetings, we've been meeting here for a number of years. We are here in Spokane, Washington, but people are welcome to join from anywhere in the world, of course. And we simulcast. We meet in person, but we also simulcast over the web. So this is primarily an in-person meeting, but you know, Chris, you've been sick today, so thank you for not bringing the gombu into our house. I appreciate that. Brian had his conflict, but I'm glad you still were able to join us so we can keep this going. It's a lot more uninteresting meeting when it's just myself. So thank you guys. I was getting really nervous.
The flow can be a bit difficult, I imagine.
Yeah. So. But what we do is we discuss all things Tolkien and Tolkien related, so not just J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, etc., but also his cohorts, C.S. Lewis, and then also people that inspired him, such as George MacDonald and many, many others, related to some connection to Tolkien in one way or another, and that can include modern stuff like the movies and the video games, etc., and, of course, all the literature. We also read at least one letter or more of J.R.R. Tolkien's himself from the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and then that often spurs a wide range of conversations based on that topic.
Oh, should I mention I went and saw The Hobbit 3 at Garland?
Oh, yeah, please do. I still have not seen it, but I don't care if there's spoiler alerts, because it sounds like
they killed the dragon.
Yeah, oh boy.
Shocker, isn't it?
That is a shocker, yeah. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to grab those books.
Trained attack books, apparently.
Attack of the Killer Books. All right, so for now we're doing this from my house. We've been doing it at various coffee shops, but it's always been a problem between noise and space and parking and other issues, so the society decided for now we're going to just do it here at my house, where at least I can set up and run my equipment easily. So let's go ahead and go over the notes from February's meeting. We met last February the 14th. Wow, hitting the 14th twice in a row. Today's March 14th.
Better than yesterday.
Which for those of you already celebrating St. Patty's Day, happy St. Patty's Day to you. They're doing the parade down in Spokane and such.
They are?
Yeah, right now. That's the Saturday just before.
Well, yesterday was Friday the 13th, which was
right, Friday the 13th again, which last month was also Friday the 13th, before. So we met February 14th here at my house. In attendance were myself, Chris, Brian, who's not here today, and Richard, as well as online guests that actually participated, Jeremiah and Tom. We often get others that are watching through the YouTube stream, and at youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars. Right now, if you go to and we're on Facebook, Twitter, all of these are under Tolkien Scholars, all one word. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, all of them ad nauseum. So you can follow us. And so in addition to the Google Plus Hangout, and this will be archived and available on our channel later, this is streaming live right now. Of course, if you're watching this later, it won't be live. But right now, we're here now.
Would that make it undead if you're watching it later?
Yeah, it's neither live nor dead. I don't know. That's a good question. And but it can be viewed through the YouTube stream. Google Plus automatically streams it when you do a broadcast on air, and you don't have to be in the Google Plus chat room to still be able to watch the stream. And then we're also in the various IRC chat rooms, the OneRing.net's chat room, Merp Chat on the Middle Earth Role Playing Network, and also Geek Sundry's channel on the Geek Shed Network. All those I have IRC channels that run on my laptop here, so that people can, even if you haven't joined inside of Google Plus, you can post comments and questions there. I try to watch for postings on Facebook and such, but those are a little trickier to keep track of between all the different social networks. But if you do post on our Facebook page or Twitter and such, I do try to respond to your postings. I can't always guarantee it. If you comment on the video stream, I have to refresh that stream to see the comments, and so unfortunately that's a problem that I won't see those comments till after the show, but I will respond to them after the show when that happens. So that's probably enough preamble. Chris, do you have a copy of the notes in front of you?
I do.
Okay, so maybe we'll take turns here discussing the notes briefly before we get on to today's topics. So Brian read January's notes, and then we had a discussion of notes covering the topics of the new meeting location. Tolkien Moot 11 is now, that's our annual convention that includes both literary and gaming activities for 3 days. It's now set to the third weekend of July every year. Previous years it's moved all over between June to August and everything in between, and now we just finally say, that's making it really hard for people to plan. Let's find a weekend that seems to work for most people and just consistently stick to it, and that hopefully isn't right on top of at least local conventions here in Spokane. So we've gone with the third weekend of July every year, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Typically, we start at 5 p.m. on Friday and go till 6 p.m. Sunday, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. Sunday night, Pacific time. Some of those major events like guest speakers and musicians and such will broadcast the streams live. The other activities, you have to be here to be able to participate, of course. And then we also do our monthly Tolkien Society meeting then. So that's coming up in July. Before you know it, it'll be here.
Yeah.
The theme for that Tolkien Moot is going to be giants, so the adventures and the topics we discuss will be anything related to giants, whether it's the stone giants that Peter Jackson completely got wrong.
Well, I thought his rationalization was they were actually mentioned in The Hobbit.
They're mentioned in The Hobbit, but he got how they're represented completely wrong. Anyway.
Don't you expect that from Hollywood?
Artistic license. Artistic license.
Yeah, that's it. Uh, so, or, you know, trolls are giant size, dragons are giant size. So any of the giant ents, any of the giant size creatures, but especially the humanoid giants. So that's what the adventure campaigns will be about, that the people will be role-playing gaming and such. And we can do our discussion topic for that month as well. So between now and then, start researching all things giant related to Tolkien. And so we'll have lots of material to discuss for that society meeting. Okay?
Okay.
The Ents are really the only giants that I remember him talking about. But
Well, trolls are giant size too. Some of them, especially the Olaghai and such.
this is true.
And then the mountain giants and such. And again, if there's a dearth of material, we can also include dragons and other things and Balrogs and try to make comparisons and contrasts. But so between now and then, let's research as much as we can about giants. I will be doing a ton since I'll be writing the adventure again. We also covered Choose Your Own Adventure books as a tie-in to the society meetings. I don't know how that tied in. Do you recall, Chris?
You had a couple of them on the table,
Right.
and
Because I'm going to be using them for traumatic brain injury patients and such.
yeah.
That
it was
a tie-in.
actually in connection with your work.
Right, okay. Venue for the foreseeable future of these meetings will be here at my house, as I discussed. Apparently I read the Elvish... Oh, that's right. We have our month... Every month we read one or more Elvish words from the Vinyar Tengwar, collected works and such. And for now we've been going through body parts, 1 or 2 or 3 body parts at a time. And we will keep doing that as we get to that. And the... What's that, Chris?
Nangwa Laksa.
That's right, yeah. So we did Elvish for beard, was Nangwa Lokse, with the question mark. Perhaps no Elvish word for it, because we were kind of amalgamating pieces together. As few, if any, elves had beards. Corrected by Jeremiah, Círdan had one, as described by Greyhavens in Return of the King. Richard read Letters of Tolkien, number 3. We had a discussion of the letter referred to as what Tolkien was writing in Lord of the Rings at the time, comparison by Tolkien of Sam and Bilbo, those who are deeply of the Shire even after their adventures, and Frodo, who goes west immediately. Also, JRRT mentions flowers' names a lot in this letter, different flower names. Chris said, history has a hand in changing who we are by changing our names and the names of objects around us. Cirith Ungol was originally Cirith Ungol with a K because of the Finnish spelling, but Tolkien changed it to go with the Latin orthography, where C is hard, as the Celtai, Celts. Chris read letter number 94. Number 9, mostly the discussion centered around J.R.R. Tolkien's mob rule reference, discussing democracy and politics. Number 10, Brian read letter number 95. Number 11, the group discussed Tolkien's reference to wishing he could visit Anglo-Saxon Britain. I'd give a bit for a time machine. You want to continue with the rest of 11 there, describing that, Chris?
Yes. I wish I had a bit. I'd give a bit for a time machine. Wiccan refers to the small Wicca kingdom of Saxons which existed near Bristol. And there was a reference to Stenton's biography of all books about Anglo-Saxon England, and some discussion about war debt from World War II and World War I, which most recently got paid off. Some is still continuing to pay. And there were comments that the sound works thanks to Hawk and his soundboard and microphones. And we're meeting today. It's Pi Day. And how are we going to relate Tolkien to Pi?
All right. We had a little trouble saying because it appears the laptop I am putting your audio over is having a problem with the speaker, so it was a little gravelly. But the stream sounded fine, so everybody else is hearing it okay. We had a little trouble following that because for some reason this one seems to be having trouble. I'm going to have to look into that. I guess someone may have to hook up external monitors or something. Thank you for that, Chris. So let's go ahead with our Elvish word of the month, or words, body parts. Still at this point, we're still reading from the Vinyar Tengwar. This is the collected works. We're at the very front page of issue number 1, volume 1, which lists all the different body parts. Well, not all, but many. And we've already covered Loxay for hair, and Finde for tress, and Dol for head, and Anta for face, Hen for eye, and Lasse for ear, Roma for shoulder. So now, we haven't done nose yet, have we? I don't think we've covered nose.
So. The nose?
Yeah. So nose is Nenowe.
Nenowe.
If I'm reading that correctly, that O looks a little distorted, but yeah, I guess this is O. So Nenowe with no accent marks.
No
Nenowe. And let's go ahead and throw in. We haven't done mouth either, so let's go mouth as well. So mouth is either pe with its PE and then accent mark over the E, or Ando. That's for mouth. Doesn't explain why there's two different versions. But so we have Nenowe, Pe, and Ando for nose, and then mouth and mouth. Questions? Topics? It doesn't really fit. Like, that doesn't jump out at me. For example, when we look at hen for eye, and we think of Amen hen and such, some of the body parts fit in with places and locations. But I can't think of any locations or references that Tolkien made to Nenowe or Pe or Ando. Does Ando come up at some point?
I don't remember.
Chris?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So that's that part.
So exciting.
Yeah. Oh, and so you reference to today's International Pie Day, PI Day. I didn't make any pie. Sorry. Are you having pie at your house there, Chris?
We might later on. We'll find out.
What kind of pie would you have?
Round.
Yeah, it better be round.
We've got some rhubarb, and we've got some huckleberry in the freezer.
Ooh, huckleberry.
Oh, rhubarb.
I love huckleberry.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'm a huckleberry hound.
Those hobbits that live in Northeast Oregon are very, very lucky, and we picked several gallons last summer, and they're still in the freezer.
Nice. All right. Shall we go ahead and read? I mean, is there any new? You said you just saw the third Hobbit movie.
Yeah.
I guess we can cover that before we get into letters.
Kind of interestingly, the confrontation, instead of it being the focus of the movie, it was more like it was annoying to Peter Jackson to have to dispose of the dragon on screen time, and it's like,
really? What do you mean? How so?
Smaug went down the first 5 minutes of the movie.
He was just sick of the dragon and wanted to move on.
Well,
battle,
that's kind of what it felt like. It felt
Right.
like he was trying to get it out of the way so he could get to other things.
Chris, you've seen the third movie as well, right?
Yeah, that part was done, and this is the whole reason why I really think that it should have been 2 movies instead of 3.
3. I think it could have been 3 without him going video game-esque and everything else, but I don't know.
Yeah, it seemed like in the second movie the build-up for Smaug was building up, and then
it was just over too quickly.
Yeah, well, it felt rushed a little bit.
Yeah.
Mostly because I think he was trying to get to the title of the movie, The Battle of Five Armies.
Okay.
So,
right, but he still wanted to leave it as a. What's that?
So go ahead.
But he still wanted to leave it as a cliffhanger from the previous movie. He didn't want to leave it at the death of Smaug.
Yeah, it probably would have played better if he killed Smaug
Right,
at the end of the second movie.
Right. but I think he wanted to leave it as a cliffhanger to try to like bring people more excitedly in or
I
something.
don't know. That there could be some good drama where you kill the dragon and you think everything's fine, and then all of a sudden you have the enemy armies appear up on the horizon.
Well, how long
could
did he
have been a
take
good
from the death of Smaug to that happening?
The battle.
Not the battle, to just the first hints that there was all the armies were forming.
It was a good portion of the movie.
Okay. Right,
Yeah.
so that would have been making the second movie that much longer to lead up to that then.
Yeah.
Well, I think he could have done it that way, and there might be some. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not Peter Jackson, thank goodness. Although he has a lot of cash.
What's that, Chris?
Speaking of cash, that was the piece that I wanted to get to. The piece that I don't remember this being in The Hobbit nearly as much, and I'm just wondering what other Tolkien-esque sources Jackson is drawing on for this concept of elvish greed. Or not elvish, dwarvish greed.
Okay. Well, there's that goes all the way back to the Silmarillion with the Noglir and things like that.
Which was the origin of the conflict that was deployed
between the elves and the dwarves.
Displayed there. No, it wasn't. Unlike Peter Jackson depicted, it wasn't the conflict with the Smaug came and the elves refused to help. It was the dwarves had possession of the necklace.
In the Noglimir back in Silmarillion.
Yeah, that had the Silmarillion on it.
Silmarillion, right. And of course the curse of that.
And it wasn't so much that the elves were greedy for wealth. It was that they had an emotional connection to this particular piece of jewelry.
And an oath for the sons of Feanor and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
but
that was a piece of the movie, was that the dwarvish greed for gold and how it turns kings' hearts sick.
Right. Well,
Right.
there's many references to dragon sickness and stuff. Even in the One Ring role-playing game, that's something that
Peter Jackson depicted that as being connected to the Arkenstone, but wasn't it? I think if you dig in The Hobbit, isn't it more that that the king under the mountain had one of the dwarven rings?
Potentially.
And I had always understood that the dwarven ring that was in possession of that dwarven individual was how they were making all the gold. And Peter Jackson decided that it had to do with the heart of the mountain instead, which,
Dragon sickness. So this is John D. Ratliff's version. So he has a nice reprint of The Hobbit with his two scholarly books filling in explanations about it. He was our guest on Tolkien Moot back in 2007 or 8. So this is actually an autographed. He was kind enough to autograph it. He's over in the Lacey, Kent, Seattle, Washington area. And Ratliff also is an avid role-playing gamer as well. He worked for TSR. He worked on the Tolkien project for Dungeons and Dragons, but they got canned at the last minute before the Peter Jackson movies, or because of the Peter Jackson movies. But anyway, in here he has a section on dragon sickness, the Horde, and also the Arkenstone as Silmaril. So let's see what he has to say. This is the second book, Return to Bag End. So part 2 of his History of the Hobbit. So 595. I knew John and Michael Martinez were both guests at the same time, and they were a great team. I was hoping Michael could join us, but he's got a really busy schedule. All right. Dragon sickness, the Horde. The last great danger, the danger Thorin had dreaded all along, and which their silence before the Elven King had not averted, was gathering about them. A host was marching up to ransack and plunder the halls of Thror. While greed over the dragon's treasure was to play an important part in the climax of the story from the earliest draft, as we see from the preceding text and also plot note C and D, Tolkien's original intent was to portray this as essentially an external force acting upon Thorin and company from outside. Bilbo's uncharacteristic behavior of pocketing the gem of Girion for himself and hints of disagreement between the Hobbit and the dwarves about how best to handle the crisis of being besieged by angry lakemen and greedy calculating elves aside, there are no indications whatsoever in the second phase materials that Thorin or any of the other dwarves succumbed to the dragon sickness of lusting after, quote, gold upon which a dragon has long brooded, page 648. So that's interesting. So that's totally related here. In fact, a passage from plot notes D suggests the opposite, and that their silence before the Elven King had not been anxiety over splitting the treasure, but because dwarves understood better than all others the power of the greed of gold, and fear, therefore, more certainly to it.
Yeah, in the movie, the elven and human forces were depicted as kind of ignoring the golden orb is kind of a secondary issue to them.
Okay.
Which, is in conflict with that.
Well, the wisdom of this reticence is shown by the unedifying scramble for the treasure that ensues immediately following Smaug's death among the lakemen. Enraged by their losses and deliberately stirred up into a blood frenzy by the Master to deflect attention from his own inglorious behavior during the defense of their city, and by the Wood Elves' king's plan to coolly seize the treasure with no better claim to it than the goblins of the third phase text have, namely because he shows up with an army large enough to take it. Thus, although the idea of the dragon sickness bringing together rival claimants for the treasure was already the motivating factor for the projected climax in the final pages of the second phase text, resolving that crisis in the unwritten chapters, had Tolkien proceeding according to his original plan, would have been a relatively straightforward matter of dealing with a wholly external threat, the besieging armies. All this was to change when the second of the two great complications that derailed the second phase narrative entered the text. The idea that Bilbo's companions would themselves succumb to the dragon sickness more strongly than any other group present, whereas he himself would be able to throw off the bewitchment and enchantment of the dragon horde, and thus take actions that would estrange him from his trusted companions of the last year and more, and even ultimately place him in the opposite side of the coming battle, which could no longer be averted. The great moral complexity of the published book's final chapters and its bittersweet resolution were thus an innovation of the third phase of editing. The original second phase ending would have been much more of a piece with the bulk of the book that preceded it, full of incident but morally unambiguous. Given the heavy influence of the Turin and Sigurd stories throughout the Lonely Mountain section of The Hobbit, it is no surprise that they play an important role here as well. But as usual with Tolkien, he was careful and creative in his borrowings, and here the Fafnir legend exerts. So this is all Wagnerian, that whole Norse mythology.
Which is, if I recall correctly, that mythology is humans dealing with dragon hordes as opposed to.
Well, you had dwarves, you had dwarves, you had humans, you had the giants, the Nibelung, and all of that.
Right, but it was from the human perspective, and so the dragon greed was more of an issue because humans are inherently greedy and easy to fall prey to that.
Okay, I don't know. The dwarf was pretty darn greedy.
I think the dwarves actually have some resistance to it.
Well, all the dwarves except for Thorin, as depicted in the movie.
No, I mean outside of Tolkien, in the Norse setting, the dwarves.
Oh.
Forgetting the dwarf's name, but was completely driven by it. So anyway, right. So mainly from his earlier unpublished work, so Silmarillion and such, the theme of cursed treasure had been a powerful narrative thread in the Book of Lost Tales, especially the tale of the Naglafring, or Necklace of the Dwarves, so the Naglamir, and no doubt owed much to the story of Fafnir's and Sigurd's treasure, also known as Andvari's Hoard after its original owner, or the Gold of the Nibelungs, or Das Rheingold, depending upon which version of the legend one consults, and that's the one Wagner wrote the part of the opera, part of the Ring cycle.
Yeah.
The Volsung's treasure on the one hand in Germanic and Norse myth, and the gold of the Rodolflim, the Silmarils, and indeed the One Ring on the other, within Tolkien's Legendarium, indiscriminately bring doom to all their owners, one by one, although a few, like Bilbo, Beren, and Eärendil, escape the curse's full effects. So this is, a number of pages. I don't want to read the whole thing. But this is pages 595 through 602 covers just the horde and that at length. At the very end, he says the Dwarven King's curse. Among the most interesting details of this painting. Painting. I don't know what he's referring to. Great. This is a really good read. If you haven't gotten it, this is really good. Yeah, John did a really, really good job with it. And Ratliff is spelled Rateliff, and much to my embarrassment, I mispronounced it when I introduced him on the video to the broadcast. I said Ratliff, and he's like, Ratliff. I'm like, oh, sorry, Ratliff. That's embarrassing. Yep. Yeah. Well, anyway, he says, among the most interesting details of this painting is the inscription in the massive treasure cup on the lower left. The words are English, but the alphabet used is Tolkien's Tengwar, except for the initials at the bottom, which use the same Old English runes employed for Fimbulfambi's map, on Thror's map. It's unusual for Tolkien to combine both writing systems in a single illustration, but not absolutely unprecedented. Okay, so this is just about the different writing. And then he goes on at 603 to the Arkenstone as Silmaril. So he's totally tying that in with the Silmaril curse. The Gem of Girion into the Arkenstone of Thrain, the Heart of the Mountain. So it evolved into that. It didn't start out that way.
Yeah, he did write the Hobbit before he wrote the Lord of the Rings, so he didn't have all the intricate plot details at his fingertips while I was writing it, because it was the prototype.
And he went back later and rewrote parts of the Hobbit to better fit the Legendarium of Lord of the Rings. Correct? Didn't he do a version later on that kind of integrated those bits and pieces a little better? Chris?
Yeah, he tried.
Sounds like he didn't
whether it was succeeded or not.
So his original concept was the Gem of Girion is so named because it was given by Girion, king of Dale, to the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain in payment for the arming of his sons. We're never told how it came into Girion's possession. And just as a new character had to be introduced to fill the role of Dragon Slayer once Tolkien decided it strained credulity to have little Bilbo in that role, Bard, whom Tolkien economically made the heir of Girion, thus opening up new plot threads and possibilities even as he resolved one issue. So too the elevation of the Gem of Girion into the Arkenstone led to the introduction of the Necklace of Girion to assume some of the plot elements no longer suitable for the original item as it evolved. So it just kept snowballing for him, basically. So it's possible that Jackson may have used like an amalgamation of these different versions in his integration into the movie. Again, I haven't seen it yet, so...
I was the thing that sticks to me most is let's get Smog out of the way and get on with the rest of the movie.
Okay.
Kind of feeling that I got from it.
All right. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think that this third movie was the most distasteful of the three, in that there was all this extra stuff thrown in that just simply wasn't in the book. And as a purist, I have trouble with that from time to time.
I guess my issue with it is that Smog wasn't given any gravitas. He was, okay, the dragon's awake and burning our town. What do? We kill him, And, it's a simple matter. You just throw a spit wad at him.
Didn't play any cunning or cleverness or.
A dragon should be like a cataclysm. a dragon isn't something that you walk up
Desolation,
to.
smog. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that you walk up to, exchange pleasantries, and then fight to the death. It's something that you have to work at, and it doesn't feel like it was
Feel like it was
treated.
over too quickly.
Well, it didn't feel like it was treated like the threat that I feel a dragon should have been.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It was treated like a D&D dragon.
Oh, really?
Well,
Yeah.
Well, maybe some of that has to do with the fact that Tolkien and Lewis had talked, and I know Lewis wrote his book later, but some of the concepts, and some of the concepts of Eustace turning into a dragon, for example, and in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, put more of a human face on a dragon. But but then you look on the other side at Tolkien and his experience with the Beast of Beowulf and such.
Right.
Yes, the dragon, if you will.
Yep. Yep.
But then I'm trying to remember what book it's in. The green. There's.
What?
It's on the bookshelf here. One sec.
Oh, the bard face down Smog without any kind of mask. He was looking into the dragon's eyes.
Oh, and doesn't get beguiled, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see, did I get? Oh,
It's another
you're not
break with
published yet.
canon. No.
There, now we got the books too. Tolkien books.
Huck's personal collection.
Yes.
Oh, don't get out of the picture. Make my life difficult.
Here, how's that?
That's better.
I'll just be
Let's see, with the
leaving
green
quiet.
screen, if I had it lit, I could do all
I'll
sorts.
just be leaving quiet.
Get over there. Did you find what you're looking for, Chris?
No, it's okay. It's probably on one of the other bookshelves.
All right.
Books moving around.
Any
here.
other? Okay. See, nobody's commenting right now. It seems to be a slow day for people, man. They're just maybe between Pi Day and St. Patrick's weekend. We're not getting a lot of commentary as we usually do. Brian, we're missing you.
The Battle of Five Armies, they
Mhm.
started out utilizing ancient armies. The formation, it wasn't about like breaking out and doing individual combats like Sparta in 300. Not Sparta, but 300. It wasn't that style of fighting. It was the guy in front of you isn't the one that kills you, it's the guy to the side of him that kills you. Because the formation was everything to those armies. If the formation broke, that was a rout. And Peter Jackson starts out with a formation, but then he abandons it in the middle of the movie in interest of 300 style fighting, which that was kind of another nitpick.
Well, that's how they fought the battle, was 300 style?
They started out in a formation, and then they moved to 300 style.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
The dwarves had the interesting turtle formation where they climbed up over each other and stacked their shields for it. The first segment
Turtle
of it.
Formation?
Roman turtle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. Yeah, I don't recall Tolkien describing that.
It was kind of open to interpretation,
Yeah,
and I think it
wasn't too
was a
detailed
good
about
call.
it.
I'm just
All right.
kind of annoyed that he started out with that, and then, but then we moved to individual combat. What?
Okay. Anything else you wanted to discuss about the movie before we move on to one of the letters?
That's fine. Farmer Giles of Ham.
Yes, Farmer Giles. What was your reference to in that?
a human or a dragon interacting with humans on good terms.
Oh, right, right, okay. I'm on the air, Drake. All right, Chris, do you want to start reading? So this number 96 is a very long letter. It's to Christopher Tolkien from his, J.R.R. Tolkien, and it is several pages long. It has long paragraphs, so maybe if we just read each, take turns on a paragraph each. Chris, do you want to start with the first paragraph?
You seem to be missing a page in my list, so let me go bring it up here. 1 sec.
All right, I'm going to try to get a different speaker for this laptop because it's so hard to understand you right now. So I'll be right back, but you guys go ahead and start that.
Do you want me to start it?
If Chris can't find it, then go ahead.
This is letter 96, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 96. I have it here.
You want me to start, Chris, so that you can have time to look?
Full description preamble.
To Christopher Tolkien, 30 January 1945, FS 78, 20 Northmore Road, Oxford. My dearest Chris, the minor imp of Sluglob's brood, who specially attends to preventing CSL and myself from meeting, provided special attention in the morning with the leaking of the scullery tap, coinciding with the blocking of the sink. It took me until nearly 11 a.m. to get that cleared up. But I got to Magdalene, where after a brief shiver over 2 depressing elm logs, elm won't burn, we decided to seek warmth and beer at Mitre. We got both. Pubs manage their businesses better than bussers. Upon my word, I don't think that the latter gentry would even hold down a Kiwi job in the RAF. A good many things happened then. My rest was rudely broken by a phone call on business, from which, quite incidentally, I learned the startling news that Professor H.C. Wilde died on Saturday. God rest his soul. But he leaves me a legacy of terrestrial trouble. For one thing, I've got to make up my mind about what to do about succession. 5 years ago, I'd have been thinking of how to get the Merton chair myself. My ambition was to get CSL and myself into the 2 Merton chairs. It would be marvelous to be both in the same college, and for me to be in a real college and shake off the dust of miserable Pembroke. But I think probably not, even if there was a chance, to continue the tale. About supper time, the glass fell and the therm rose, and a great downfall of snow with wind, west to southwest, began. It was piled high against the doors before midnight, but it was really thawing underneath, so that although it went on and off and on all night, it was nowhere much over half a foot, except in knee-high drifts. All the same, coal, coke, and fowls had vanished, and I had a most laborious morning digging things out before going to lecture. I arrived late after an appalling acrobatic ride, attired like a Skegness fisherman. And my apologies for being late on the platform, Tellurian Theatre, as I had been catching sardines, was very well received, better indeed than my subsequent disquisition on Ulfa of Angel, or on the itinerary of Israel from Egypt to the Red Sea. At the subsequent bird and bee session, thank heaven no fish arrived in port, the UQ, alias Honest Humphrey, arrived ticked out in morning mountaineering kit. When asked why he was out of uniform, he replied, "I am not in the Swiss Navy. The British Navy does not come out in snow." Alas, he's being transferred to Liverpool soon. Indescribable mixture of ice and slush. I fell off 3 times, and was, of course, hustled into the gutter and drenched in fountains of filthy squelch by the amiable people who drive private cars. It took me till nigh 3:30 to finish the clearance of snow and clear drains, and then I settled down to your delightful letters. I hadn't a moment to look at them when they had arrived at breakfast time, but they had their effect by merely arriving, as you can see by my skittishness on the platform and from CSL's remark at the B&B. What's the matter with him this morning? He's quite above himself? That's the end of the paragraph. If you want to.
Chris, are you ready?
Yes. As
Alright.
for Eden, I think most Christians, except the very simple and uneducated or those protected in other ways, have been rather bustled and hustled now for some generations by the self-styled scientists, and their sort of tech genesis into a lumber room of their own mind and not very fashionable furniture, a bit ashamed to have it about the house. Don't you know, when the bright, clear young people called, I mean, of course, even the fidelis who do not sell it second hand or burn it as soon as the modern taste began to sneer. In consequence, they have indeed, much as myself as any, as you say, forgotten the beauty of the matter even as a story. Lewis recently wrote a most interesting essay, if published, I don't know, showing that of what great value the story value was as mental nourishment of the whole Christian story, New Testament especially. It was a defense of the kind of attitude which we tend to sneer at, the faint-hearted that loses faith, but clings at least to the beauty of the story as having some permanent value. His point was that they do still, in that way, get some nourishment and are not cut off wholly from the sap of life. For the beauty of the whole story, while not necessarily a guarantee of its truth, is a uh, con- concomitant of it, and a fidelius is meant to draw nourishment from the beauty as well as the truth, so that a faint-hearted admirer is really still getting something which even one of the faithful, stupid, insensitive, shamefaced, may be missing, but partly as a development of my own thought on my lines of and work, technical and literary, partly in contact with CSL, and in various ways, not the least, not least the firm guiding hand of Alma Mater Ecclesia. I do not feel either ashamed or dubious of the Eden myth. It is not, it has not, of course, historically the same kind as the New Testament, which are virtually contemporary documents, while Genesis is separated by while Genesis is separated by we do not know how many sad, exiled generations from the fall, but certainly there was an Eden on this very unhappy earth. We all long for it, and we are all constantly glimpsing it. Our whole nature, as it is best and least corrupted, its gentlest and most humane, is still soaked with the house or with the sense of exile. If you come to think of it, your very just horror at the stupid murder of the hawk, and your obstinate memory of this home of yours in an idyllic hour when often there was an illusion of stay of time and decay for a sense of gentle peace. Something Greek stands the clock at 10 to 3 and is there honey still for tea, are derived from Eden. As far as we can go back, for the nobler pan of the human mind is filled with thoughts of sin, peace, and goodwill, and with the thought of its loss, we shall never recover it, for that is not the way of repentance, which works spirally and not in a closed cycle. We may recover something like it, but on a higher plane, just as, to compare a small thing, the convened urban gets more out of the country than the mere yokel, but he cannot become a real landsman. He is both more and in a way less truly earthy anyway. Of course, I suppose that, subject to the permission of God, the whole human race, as each individual is free not to rise again, but to go to perdition and carry out the fall to its bitter bottom, as each individual can
Singulator?
at certain periods. The present is notably one that seems not likely a likely event, but imminent. Still, I think it would be a millennium, the prophesied 1,000-year rule of the saints. For example, those who have, for all their imperfections, never finally bowed heart and will to this world or the evil spirit, in modern but not universal terms, mechanism, scientific materialism. Socialism is either its socialism in either of its factions now at war. Next.
I am so glad you felt that The Ring is keeping up its standards and, it seems, achieving that difficult thing in a long tale, maintaining a difference of quality and atmosphere in events that might easily become samey, S-A-M-E-Y. For myself, I was probably most moved by Sam's disquisition on the seamless web of story, and by the scene when Frodo goes to sleep on his breast, and the tragedy of Gollum, who at that moment came within a hair of repentance, but for one tough word from Sam. But the moving quality of that is on the different plane to Celebrimbor, etc. There are two quite different emotions. One that moves me supremely, and I find small difficulty in evoking, the heart-racking sense of the vanished past, best expressed by Gandalf's words about the Palantir, and the other, the more ordinary emotion, triumph, pathos, tragedy of the characters. That I am learning to do as I get to know my people, but it is not really so near my heart, and is forced on me by the fundamental literary dilemma. A story must be told, or there'll be no story. Yet it is the untold stories that are most moving. I think you are moved by Celebrimbor because it conveys a sudden sense of endless untold stories. Mountains seen far away, never to be climbed, distant trees like niggles, never to be approached, or, if so, only to become near trees, unless in paradise or niggles perish.
Well, my space will soon run out. It is also it is 9 p.m. And I have some letters of necessity to write and 2 lectures tomorrow. So I must be thinking of closing down soon. I read eagerly all details of your life and the things that you see and do and suffer, jive and boogie-woogie among them. You will have no heart tug at losing that, for it is essentially vulgar, music corrupted by the mechanism, echoing in dreary, unnourished heads. But you'll remember the other things, even the storms and the dry veld, and even the smells of the camp when you return to this other land. I can see clearly now, in my mind's eye, the old trenches and the squalid houses and the long roads of Artois, and I would visit them again if I could. I'll just finish the last paragraph.
All right, good.
I have just heard news. Russians 60 miles from Berlin. It does look as if something decisive might happen soon. The appalling destruction and misery of this war mount hourly. Destruction of what should be, indeed is, the common wealth of Europe and the world if mankind were not so besotted. Wealth, the loss of which will affect us all, victors or not. Yet people gloat to hear the endless lines 40 miles long of miserable refugees, women and children pouring west, dying on the way. There seem no bowels of mercy or compassion, no imagination left in this dark, diabolic hour. By which I do not mean that it may not all in the present situation, mainly, not solely, created by Germany, be necessary and inevitable. But why gloat? We were supposed to have reached the stage of civilization in which it might be necessary to execute a criminal, but not to gloat, or to hang his wife and child by him while the orc crowd hooted. The destruction of Germany, be it 100 times merited, is one of the most appalling world catastrophes. Well, you and I can do nothing about it. And that should be a measure of the amount of guilt that can be justly be assumed to attach to any member of a country who is not a member of its actual government. Well, the first war of the machines seems to be drawing to its final inconclusive chapter, leaving, alas, everyone the poorer, many bereaved or maimed, and millions dead, and only one thing triumphant, the machines. As the servants of the machines are becoming a privileged class, the machines are going to be enormously more powerful. What's their next move? All the love of your own father.
Da da da.
So I love how he puts it in context of where he is in the story he's writing and where historical events are at that moment. He just heard about the Russians near Berlin and such.
Yeah, that last
just gives it such a
paragraph, he touches on the practice of demonizing your opponent.
Right, yeah. The dehumanizing process to make it easier to kill, yeah, and destroy. I particularly was struck by his discussion of the untold story being the most powerful, but I love how he says, a story must be told or there'll be no story. Yet it's the untold stories that are the most moving. that was just a great line there.
Huh.
And yeah, it's the hint and subtlety. That's something about, have either of you read H.P. Lovecraft at all? Cthulhu and such?
Yeah, a little bit.
What about you, Chris?
I have not read Lovecraft, no.
So I'm not a horror fan, and Stephen King I find really boring, and many others. But I've read a few. I read a bunch of Stephen King just because that was what was available when I was working at the mine back in the 80s. And as you're up in the middle of nowhere, you read what you can find. Yeah, I was working at a gold mine up in central Idaho mountains as a family thing, been for generations. And it's up in the middle of nowhere. It's 20 miles from the nearest paved road, etc., up in the Frank Church Wilderness River, no return.
So you were in the town of Middle in the county of Nowhere?
Yeah, except there's no town. It's just a mine. So anyway, read like Amityville Horror and Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft. And while Stephen King and Amityville Horror and the others were very graphic and detailed and shocking about what they were describing, H.P. Lovecraft was much more insinuated and hinted and let your imagination fill in the blanks. And it was always people like librarians and things like that and news reporters who were discovering these things piece by piece, a little bit at a time, and little hints into these stories. And your imagination fills in those gaps and made it much more scary than the ones that were in your face and graphic and detailed.
Also, Lovecraft had a Victorian sense of horror, whereas somehow you would end up in bed with your long-lost sister.
What?
Incest was his big, it was the thing that stuck with me.
When was...
H.P. Lovecraft, they have a horror of incest, and he would use that a lot, I thought.
Really? I thought there was like one story out of all his stories that had that. That I recall. I could be wrong. I don't remember. I mean, I have the complete works, and I only recall one story having that. But anyway,
it strikes me as a very Victorian thing, and
he was writing in an intentionally archaic style. So even though he was in the 1920s, he was writing in more of an 1850s, 1880s style.
Well, the sense of that horror was lost on me, so it was kind of a hollow, like, okay,
Interesting. Well, so I've had a lot of other people read the stories, and they've really got engaged. I have the broadcasts on the Spartan Show Adventurers Guild each Tuesday, and the main host of that show has started reading it because for his character he chose Cthulhu as his patron deity for his warlock and such. So because you have to make a pact with that, and so he'd never read Cthulhu. He didn't know what Cthulhu was. So now he's reading. He's going, "Whoa, this is." And again, he commented on it. It's not in your face. It lets you build up to it, It lets you fill in the horror of it, and then, he will give you a couple little bit of tidbits of detail, but it is a lot of that untold story that makes it that much more. He's just telling short stories, and he leaves a lot for your imagination to fill in, but not too
Whereas
much.
this day and age, it's more
It's
about
graphic
we give you
detail,
everything.
right?
We
There's
paint.
nothing left to the imagination.
Yeah.
Whether it's nudity or violence or whatever, there's nothing left to the imagination.
Yeah.
So if you have an active imagination, those books are compelling. I think that ties in with what Tolkien was saying there about that being the most moving.
And most children today have an atrophied
One of the things
imagination.
people complain about when they read The Lord of the Rings is they feel that some parts aren't, sometimes he goes on too long about things they don't care about, like the countryside and those things. And on the other hand, he doesn't detail the combat and doesn't detail the gore. And I've had kids complain about that. Combat wasn't detailed enough and stuff. It's like, what? And then they complain that he's too detailed about all the other stuff they don't care about, which is the culture, the countryside, the feeling, the setting, the language, the history. They care less, and then when they hit the travel stage in the Two Towers, which you gotta admit, everybody slogs through that part of the Two Towers.
Two Towers,
it's a little
yeah,
slow.
that was a little
travel slows things down. I just had that with the group Tuesday, where it was a big travel section, and they went, it kind of felt kind of slow there for a while. I was like, yeah, that was the point. The travel, the arduous wearing you down with just how difficult it is with the weather, and Tolkien having been in the army and stuff and having to march and experience that, it's difficult to convey without kind of stretching it out to try to convey. Because if you just say, well, they traveled 12 days and it was really miserable and cold and tired, and then boom, you go to the next step, you don't really get the feeling of how miserable
it was. Yeah, that's the "are we there yet" syndrome.
Right. And so I was doing that with the group and giving it as an illustration to the players. And they experienced it. They got that. Wow, it's way too cold. Oh, wow, it's way too muddy and miserable. Oh, wow, we hear the wolves howling and getting closer, and built the tension. And then nothing actually happened as far as combat and such that they were expecting. But it was miserable, and they were numb, and they were cold, and they kept constantly seeking shelter, and they're making slow progress while they're dealing with forces trying to follow them in the distance. And all in all, though, they ended up being able to enjoy it, even though they felt that first part was slower. And then, of course, it did culminate in something, significant at the end. So, anyway, I thought that the untold story being the most moving, where our imagination fills in, and the hints of it, and Tolkien. That's part of what appeals to me with Tolkien is the grandiosity behind it. He hints constantly at so much more, and it just gives that feeling of it being such a bigger,
more depth to it.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah. The problem with movies and not books is it doesn't leave much to the imagination. And the books that I seem to enjoy the most are the ones that leave things to the imagination. And there's something about a book that just doesn't tell the whole story, and you have to figure it out, like a good mystery novel.
Yeah, leaves you wanting more, but you got to feel some level of satisfaction. Otherwise, that's just frustrating. But if it gives you enough satisfaction, but still leaves you wanting more, it's got you hooked.
But then there's the concept of the predictable plot. That's a little too. Yeah. So
right.
When authors have to be a little bit careful.
Right. Yeah.
The book I'm writing, the first chapter, which I have a rough draft done of, is talking about the main character's dreary day-to-day kind of thing, kind of the things that she deals with on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've discovered from trying to run games in this setting is that if I tell people what's going on, they sort of wander off like Alzheimer's patients.
Mm-hmm.
And I never get to finish the story.
Right.
So I'm trying. The second chapter, I let Brian read parts of the second chapter that I have written, and his reaction was it blew his mind.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that that's not giving so much detail that there's no mystery left to hook the reader into the rest of the novel.
Right.
Which is a concern because that's the effect that I seem to be fighting against when I'm trying to tell this story.
Okay. Yeah, it is tricky balancing too much detail on it, and the problem is that is so subjective to the audience. For example, my boys loved reading the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series, and I liked the first book, and I was okay with the second book, but to me, he plodded on ad nauseum on a lot of stuff, and I really, by the fifth book, I just couldn't read anymore. I couldn't stand it anymore.
Well, I had heard that his methodology for writing that was basically a long-running campaign.
Well, he had run a long-running campaign first. He'd been running a long-running campaign, and it was based on his campaign, and that's fine. There's many books. You have the Greyhawk sagas from Gygax. You have the whole Forgotten Realms series with Drizzt and the others. You have the Dragonlance ones from Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and they all did a great job. I just personally didn't care for Robert Jordan's style at all, and couldn't continue it. The first book I really enjoyed. The first book I read it when it first came out, way back when.
I haven't actually read his work, but
he has 13
the
books.
impression that I've gotten of it is that I wouldn't like it.
First one was really good, I thought. I thought it was, and it was fine when I read it. There were no other books out of the series at the time when I read it.
There's like 18.
13 now.
Oh, 13.
Yeah. The last couple were finished by a combination of his wife
he was at
and
that,
Brandon Sanderson.
Brian Sanderson was
Brian
at
Sanderson was at Spokane, right. And Drake went to his workshops, etc. And Drake really likes Sanderson, who I guess now is the creative writer at BYU. Professor. So anyway, but I don't care for it. But that's subjective. There's lots of others, millions of others who love those books, including my kids. And so the same thing with Tolkien and with Lovecraft and all of those. So it is tricky. There is no universal rule on what's enough detail, what's too much detail. It's going to be really variable with your audience. It seems like an older audience might have more patience to put up with more of that detail, especially if it ties into a cohort effect where it brings some sort of nostalgia or other connection to that particular audience. So if your audience is of an age group where mentioning the formica and the linoleum on the floor of this pattern or other, which reminds you of the 70s, might bring back a rush of memories from, that childhood or adolescent era of what that was like. But to a millennial, that is probably meaningless. It wouldn't connect and resonate with them effectively, and just adding more detail to it to try to evoke that connection wouldn't be any more helpful. So it definitely can be a challenge.
So how does Tolkien identify with millennials when he was identifying most with the wartime issues that were going on while he was writing, and I guess an entire generation that had been racked by war, a generation or two generations?
Well, one question is, will they resonate? I mean, I don't know how. I know the movies were popular, but I don't know how popular the book and spiked the book sales. But what has happened with the younger generation of the book sales is the question. Really don't know. How many younger folk are in second grade reading The Hobbit now with the millennial and with the YouTubers and all of that? How many really take the time to read that anymore?
Oh, there's always going to be
Kindle or whatever.
There's always going to be individuals that
the individuals. I mean,
buck the trend.
Right. But I'm saying, so what is the overall trend? Is it still as previous several generations? We had our parents' generations and our generations, read these books voraciously. What's happening with the,
Well, they're being trained by movies. They're being trained by movies and cell phones to, live in the moment. And
because my kids have read them because I got them reading early and reading lots of books, but most of their peers have not read any of the books.
Yes, precisely.
Well, that requires a lot of time that most of them don't want to invest.
Yeah, so we don't know yet if Tolkien resonates for that generation as effectively. I think his universal concepts with war and good and evil, I think, would resonate, but will his attempting to evoke the images of the countryside and of the home and hearth and all of those things have any connection? When war is so distant for us, right? We watch it happen on TV, but it's distant. It's not something, we're not being shelled as his generation was. We don't have, our generation grew up with the threat of nuclear war over us with the Soviet Union and such. So that was always something that we were being bombarded with as a threat. At least I was. I remember having to do drills and everything. We were having to do the duck and cover baloney all the time.
It was a theory.
Yeah, no, it was false security, just like TSA.
Yeah. Really? I was kind of thinking the TSA was like.
You're on the no-fly list now.
I'm already on the harassment list. I don't fly anymore because it's so bad.
I was thinking TSA was laying the foundations for they're not there yet, but there's the potential they could use the TSA as a foundation structure for like a Gestapo-style organization.
They're going to have to really improve their competence and effectiveness. They're way too far away from that right now.
Right.
Homeland Security, maybe, not the TSA branch. Anyway, it's total tangent. So, yeah.
In terms of a letter, Henry Cecil Kennedy Wilde published many papers and books during his career. He published the Universal Dictionary of the English Language in 1932.
Oh, wow.
And he was professor of English language and philology at Liverpool, and then Merton Professor of English Language and Literature at the University of Oxford, and a Fellow of Merton College, Oxford, from 1920 until his death in 1945. So he had been around, and he was kind of the fuddy-duddy chair who made sure things ran the way they ran in good British form for a long, long, long time. And now Tolkien is saying, well, either I get the chair or Lewis gets the chair.
I think he changed the chair, his thinking of the chair had changed from something desirable to something to be avoided, though.
Well, he said, he said, I learned the startling news that Professor H.C. Wilde died on Saturday, God rest his soul, but he leaves me a legacy of terrestrial trouble. For one thing, I've got to make up my mind what to do about the succession. 5 years ago, and I've been thinking of how to get the Merton chair myself. My ambition was to get C.S. Lewis and myself into the 2 Merton chairs. It'd be marvelous to be both in the same college, and for me to be in a real college and shake out the dust of miserable Pembroke. But I think probably not, even if there was a chance. Where does it say why not?
Just the characterization is terrestrial trouble, I guess.
Well, being chair means you're an administrator and you don't have
doing
time.
Actual creative work.
You don't have time to work on anything. Except, however, if you look at the Merton Professor of English Language and Literature lineage, Wilde had it till 1945, and then guess who had it till 1959?
C.S. Lewis?
No.
Who?
J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, he did get it then.
He did have it.
He did get it, okay. I didn't know that. I didn't make that connection. So he thought not, but then he did.
It sounded to me more like it was short-lived second thoughts. You know, do I really want this responsibility and this hassle kind of thing?
This would give you an idea of why, maybe, potentially, he didn't have time to finish all of the work.
Right. He became so busy, that's true.
He wanted to finish for a long time.
Because he was already overwhelmed with just dealing with grading papers and such as a professor. Then he starts being on boards and dealing with all the administrivia. That would definitely and that's because that's a group meeting thing. He'd have less time on his own to ruminate on his ideas.
You betcha.
Interesting. Interesting. Any other sections of that letter you thought that jumped out at you? Either of you?
Just the demonization comment.
Right. Yeah, demonization of the enemies and dehumanizing, so it's easier to do atrocities to them.
It was also kind of questioning, shouldn't we not be jumping for joy over the misfortune of others, kind of thing?
Yeah, the German word for the misfortune, the feeling you get when you see someone famous or in power, in having bad things happen to them.
Oh.
It's I always forget it. It is Schadenfreude. Germans have a word for Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude, and it's when. So let's say there's some famous star or politician who
Osama bin Laden.
just collapses, and well, it's usually not somebody like Hitler or something. I mean, you could apply to it, but it's usually just someone famous. And seeing them torn down or embarrassed or humiliated or brought low, and some people get a feeling of glee or just some sort of feeling of, oh, that ha 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 ha.
Well, I kind of
for that
encountered
happening
that.
to them.
I kind of encountered that when Osama bin Laden got killed.
Okay. All right. Let's see. In Wikipedia.
Don't get me wrong. He was an evil man, but many people were evil.
So it says, is pleasure derived from the misfortunes of others, taken from the German and literally means harm joy. It is the feeling of joy or pleasure when one sees another fall or suffer misfortune. It's also borrowed by some other languages.
I was wondering what the component words were, because German likes to take
they're compound. They compound huge compound words.
Wiedersehen, for example.
Let's see, Merriam-Webster, a feeling of enjoyment.
Yeah.
What's that?
Especially in academia, they tend to be very, very large compound word.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense when you break it down, and unlike English, where you have to dig a bit, and it's not always complete words that are put together. With Germans, they take complete words and solder them together, and it's a new word.
Anything else? We can either go on to more letters, or we can call it a wrap if you want. Seems to be kind of running a little slow today. Audience low.
I do have a bit of a
yes
conflict.
Okay.
Scheduling conflict.
For next month?
No, for today. My mom has an appointment at 3:30, so.
So you got to wrap up anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then why don't we, Chris? Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, that will be good for today.
Okay. Because we're missing our Finnish audience, and we're missing Brian and a couple others.
There was one thing from last month regarding the Finnish CK issue.
Okay, right.
And I looked it up, and Finnish doesn't have a C.
Oh, they just use Ks. Right.
That's right.
Okay.
Mm.
So you don't really have that hard C, soft C conflict.
They just use S and K, which makes sense.
I always
C is kind of redundant.
I think that Sirathungal rolls better off the tongue than Kirathungal for some reason.
Or Celeborn.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. Well, thank you for that, Chris. Anything else?
That's it.
Anything else, Richard?
Nothing pops to my...
Anybody else online? We again seem to have a lot slower. I don't know if it's St. Patrick's Day or Pi Day or what, but our audience participation was at lowest I've seen it in over a year. Basically zero. I hope those of you who did check out the stream and who are checking this out later did enjoy. And so for next month, I'm going to be out of town, actually, but it'd be great if you guys could still keep the meeting going. I'm doing my presentation in Seattle at Seattle Children's Hospital and such for the 16th annual Washington State Therapeutic Recreation Association conference, and I'm doing a presentation, an hour-and-a-half presentation, on using role-playing games for therapeutic and educational intervention modalities from a therapeutic recreation perspective.
That was
a mouthful.
Yes.
But it's descriptive.
It's a descriptive
for those
mouthful.
in the profession. Basically, it's using how to use role-playing games to help people heal and learn and such. And I've been working on this for 10 plus years, as you guys well know, rpgresearch.com. And so I'm going to be gone that whole weekend for the conference, and I'll be in the middle of the conference during our next Tolkien Society meeting. But it'd be great if Chris, Richard, and Brian, if you guys could still make it happen.
Would it be possible to postpone it to the third Sunday?
The problem is when we move it around, that keeps killing off participation.
Well, the problem that I see is that I don't have the technical expertise to actually broadcast it.
What about you, Chris? You have some technical ability.
I can broadcast it so long as I have the appropriate passwords and such to.
I can give you that, no problem.
Into the account, so yes.
Yeah.
That's assuming that YouTube doesn't disassociate your accounts for you again.
It's so anyway, but it's working right now, so I can definitely give you that, no problem. And would you guys be able to go to his house for that?
I wouldn't have.
Would that work for you, Chris?
From this point of view, I don't see a problem with that.
Would that work for you, Chris?
Yep.
Okay, so hopefully next month's meeting, then you guys will do at Chris's house. I'll give Chris the technical. What's that?
Brian. Whichever.
What?
Mine or Brian's, whichever.
Okay, yeah, you guys can decide that since I'll only be able to check you guys out after the fact. But that way we stay on the schedule. I will post that on Meetup just so people know that's still happening, but it won't be at my house. People don't show up. I created a Meetup group it's the only Tolkien Society on Meetup in the world. Nobody bothered to use Meetup for any Tolkien meetings. Too specific things. So I will let people know. I won't give them your address, but I'll just let them know that they can still join online and such. And I'll give you that info for the Google Plus account. And then, do you use IRC at all, or would that be adding too many layers for you to deal with? Because that's usually how our Finnish audience participates, through comments.
Yeah, I think if Brian runs that or something like that, we could make it work.
Okay. Yeah, I think his daughter knows, because she hangs out in the Tolkien Gateway one all the time.
Yep.
So, or Tolkien, sorry, the One Ring, not Tolkien Gateway. Tolkien Gateway's defunct as far as the chat room.
I'm not a super multitasker like other people.
Understood. Okay, well, looks like that's it. Thank you, everybody, for making it. At least we were able to keep it happening. And it's the second Saturday of each month, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific time typically. We're wrapping up a little bit earlier this time. Our website is tolkienscholars.org. That's all one word, no hyphen. We are on Facebook under Tolkien Scholars, and Twitter, and Reddit, and I don't know how many others. And of course, Google Plus and YouTube. It's youtube.com/Tolkien Scholars. And you can join our IRC chat channel anytime through merp.com. There's an IRC link there. That's where the Finnish folk hang out all the time with their projects. And wherever you may be well. Namarie.